Kakadosh, Boker Or. Good morning. I wanted to share with you an incredible idea, which we're going to speak about actually this Shavuot tonight. Listen to this. This is actually a newspaper, The Telegraph, that Britain could create the first three-parent baby through IVF. So first, let's go through the article, and then we'll speak out about, what are the different ideas. And it says like this: Britain will become the first country in the world to create babies with the DNA of three people under government plans, which could see the procedure offered on the NHS, that's like the healthcare system in England, by next year. This was in the year 2013. So this is June 28, 2013. It says here, parents at high risk of having children with severe disabilities such as muscular dystrophy will be offered controversial new IVF treatment after it was given, right, with the green light by ministers today. It means that the world's first three-parent body could be born in Britain by 2015 if detailed proposals for regulating the procedure pass the public consultation and are approved by Parliament next year. Okay? Very good. So it says up to 10 patients per year are expected to undergo the treatment, which involves replacing a fraction of the mother's damaged DNA with that of a healthy donor. So let's explain. It's not just done for fun. They're trying to mix and match different DNAs from different mothers or different people in order to come and to have a child like that. But listen carefully. The process avoids the risk of the mother passing inherited defects, which can lead to a host of rare and debilitating conditions affecting the heart muscles and brain onto her children. The technique is controversial because it involves the germline modification of the embryo's DNA, meaning the third party's genetic material would not only be passed on to the child, but also to future generations down the female line. So therefore, it's actually going to have an effect not only on this child, on future generations as well. But ministers will publish draft regulations later this year, allowing the therapy to high-risk families after a previous public consultation conducted by the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority last year revealed overall support. The technique is aimed at tackling a collection of rare hereditary conditions which are caused by mutated mitochondria, structures which supply power to our cells. About 99.8% of our DNA, including all the genes which govern our appearance and identity, is found in the nucleus of cells and is inherited evenly from both parents. But a small fraction resides in the power supply mitochondria and is only passed on from mother to child. So it's not even from the father, this is only mother to child. Defects in the mitochondria can cause a range of serious problems, including muscular dystrophy, and affect about 1 in every 6,500 children born in the UK, greater than the number affected by childhood cancer. So just to understand what numbers we're talking about, that means even higher than cancer in children is this problem. So-called mitochondrial replacement thereby therapy would avoid the risk of mothers transmitting diseases to the children while still passing on the rest of their parents' characteristics. So therefore, what would they do? They would remove the nucleus from a donor egg and replace it with the equivalent genetic material from the mother's egg, either before or after fertilization by the father. So you understand what happened? They take the nucleus of a third party, they would replace it by the nucleus of this mother, and they take the sperm, obviously, of the husband. They put them together. Now they're going to fertilize it. So it's whether it's before or after. But the mitochondria, which is the outer part of the cells of this egg, is actually going to be from a third mother. The resulting egg could then be implanted and fertilized if necessary using standard IVF techniques. The child would inherit its identity from its mother and father, but would gain the power supply mitochondria from the donor. Professor Dame Sally Davies, the chief medical officer, compared the process to changing a faulty battery in a car. He says the new mitochondria from third parent make the child healthy, but would not change their outward appearance. Mitochondrial disease can be a devastating impact on the people who inherit it, she said. It is only right that we look to introduce a life-saving treatment as soon as we can. Professor Doug Turnbull, who pioneered the technique at Newcastle University, added, I'm delighted the government is moving forward with published draft regulations this year and a final version for debate in Parliament next year. This is excellent news for families with mitochondrial disease. This will give women who carry this disease genes, more reproductive choice, and opportunity to have children free of mitochondrial diseases. This again happened. This was in the newspaper, in the Telegraph on June 28, 2013. Okay, so now why is this so important for us to understand? Because now we're going to get to the entire shiur. Can a child have two halachic mothers or fathers? Okay, this is what we're going to be speaking about today. So now we're going to ask the question, can a child have two halachic mothers or fathers? So we just heard a few minutes ago the opinions that they were saying, 1 second, how could that be? Other than, again, maybe step-parents, which that's what they said here in the crowd, right? It makes sense, but how could it be? Among the newest developments in fertility medicine is the possibility of creating a fetus containing DNA from 3 people, 1 man and 2 women. Again, the procedure is done in instances in which one egg cell has defective mitochondria. The nucleus of the egg cell is removed and implanted into the cytoplasm of the donated cell with healthy mitochondria. This hybrid egg is then fertilized by the father's sperm. It seems inevitable that the time will come when scientists will be able to create a hybrid egg cell comprised of equal contributions from 2 different egg cells. Because again, until here, the main egg still comes from the mother. You're just taking from the extra third, mother. You're taking from her something which was the mitochondria, which is not the main part. You understand? That's why the child will still have the appearance of his parents, but we're getting part of it. So here he says, in the future, they for sure will exist and they will create something. Just like we could speak about cloning, and there's a lot of what we would speak about there as well. But there's going to get there. Now, 1 second. Here, Mrs. Sion said beautifully before, there's the Gemara Nida. The Gemara Nida says there are 3 partners in the creation of a newborn child: mother, father, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So now what are you trying to get more people involved here? So we might as well soon face scenarios that all of a sudden there could be 4 partners then. Hashem, the father, and 2 or more of the mothers, right? So now we have to understand, is it permitted, not permitted, what's going on? So listen to this. We know we are on Shavuot. David Melech actually was born and passed away on Shavuot. Remember, he was born and died on the same day, and he was born and passed away on Shavuot. That's why there's a minhag to read Tehillim on all of Shavuot. To finish all of Tehillim on Shavuot, this is when he passed away, and it was also on Shabbat. Okay? And we know that Matan Torah was on Shabbat. Okay? So, and he passed away during the time of the Mincha of Shabbat. That's why we say 3 tzidkatechas. Tzidkatecha kareel. Obviously, now we don't say Tacharonim during this month of Sivan, from Rosh Chodesh until the 12th, 13th, 14th, whichever the minhag is. But we usually, when there's Tacharonim, we say Tzidkatecha, 3 Tzidkatechas by the time of Mincha, for 3 people that passed away on Mincha of Shabbat: Yosef HaTzadik, Moshe Rabbeinu, and David HaMelech. Yeah? So now listen to this. Remember that David killed Goliath. And by killing Goliath, he was able to get married to the daughter of Shaul, which is Michal bat Shaul. Now remember, Goliath was actually a cousin of David HaMelech. Why was it a cousin of David HaMelech? Because we had Ruth, right, and Orpah. Orpah left Ruth, right? She left Naomi, and she went back to her father's house, right? And Ruth stayed with Naomi, and she had Malchut Bet David. Okay? Now, listen to this. The Gemara in Sotah, this is the Membet Amud Bet, 42b, discusses the description of the Philistine warrior Goliath, right? The Philistine, Goliath. Remember, Goliath was making huge problems for Am Yisrael. That's why Shaul HaMelech said, anybody that kills Goliath, I'll give them my daughter and I'll give them wealth, right? Now think about it. You know what that is, right? Giving him the princess. Obviously, this guy was an eyesore. And what does it say there in Shemuel, chapter 17, pasuk Daled 4? It calls him Ish HaBenayim. What does exactly that mean, Ish HaBenayim? There's different interpretations of this term. One of them is Bar Mea Pape V'chada Nane. Rashi explains it means a man of 100 stepfathers and 1 father. Yeah? Which again, like what you guys mentioned before, could make sense. You have 1 father, then you have another 100 stepfathers. But listen to this. The night Goliath's mother conceived, Rashi explains she engaged in relations with 100 different men, and she conceived from one of them. Okay, so in that night that she separated from Naomi, she went and she conceived, right, that she had relations with 100 people, but she only conceived from one. Okay, that's according to Rashi. So therefore, when it says "Mi ben anashim arbe isha benai" means that a man from many different men, it doesn't mean literally that there's many different men. It was only one man that actually scored, as they say. You understand? That means there was only one that he came out of, right? But we don't know which one because there was 100. So how do you know which one? Now, even if you're going to tell me that 100 is not 100% literally 100, but it means that she had a lot of different people, relations with her on that night, just to understand. Tosafot, though, brings a Yerushalmi. Yeah, and he advances a different view regarding Goliath's origin. The context of the Yerushalmi comments on the ruling in Yevamot. Listen to this case. We just did this in Daf Yomi, I would say a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. The case is like this. A man, right now, when a person passes away, right? I'll first do it outside, then we'll read it inside, yeah? A man passes away without children. So what happens? The brother has to do Yibum. What is Yibum? The brother gets married to his wife, to the wife of the one that the deceased, so which is his sister-in-law, basically. And then they have a child, and this child is going to be al Shem Achiv Amet. It's going to be as if to say if you want to call it the Gilgul, or the fixing, or the Tikkun, whatever you want to call it, of the deceased. Because the deceased passed away without children. Fine, no problem. How long does he have to wait before doing Ibum? The Mishnah says 3 months. Why? Maybe she was already pregnant. The husband passed away, and maybe she's pregnant. And if she's pregnant, she doesn't do Ibum. Yeah, if she's pregnant, she's going to have a child, and there's no Ibum. The father had a child. Fine, no problem. Okay, very, very good. It sounds perfect. So now what happened was, somebody was trigger happy. Yeah, he didn't want to wait. So he went and he did Ibum immediately. Now, after 9 months, she's pregnant, and she gives birth. Now, we have a doubt what's going on. Is this a child of a 9-month child from the first husband? Or is it a child, a 7-month child from the second husband? And we don't know. So because we don't know, she has to get divorced. They get divorced, all right? They're not allowed to stay together. They have to get divorced. But the child is still kosher. So now let's see what it says over here in English. It says, the Mishnah's ruling in Yevamot, Lamed He Amud Bet, 35b, concerning the case of a man who marries his brother's widow, and she soon becomes pregnant and has a child. The timing of the birth is such that it cannot be determined whether the child was conceived from the deceased brother and born full term, means in 9 months, or if the infant, is prematurely born child of the current husband, meaning it's a 7-month of the second husband. So if the child had been conceived from the deceased brother, then the widow's remarriage to the living brother is invalid because there's no mitzvah yibum. Yibum is only which allows the person to get married to a sister-in-law is only if he's deceased without any children. Therefore, given the possibility that the widow had conceived from before the husband's death, so she and her second husband must divorce. Why? Because the legitimacy of their marriage is questionable. Okay, until you're clear. Meaning, because of the doubt that maybe she was pregnant from the first husband's, right, a child, so therefore the second husband is nothing. Nowadays, you're right, there's DNA tests, there's much more than what it used to be in the olden days, but then even then, we go back into the shiur that we gave in the past, do we rely upon DNA for everything, right? But okay, very good. Says now, however, though, the Mishnah notes that the baby is legitimate child and is not considered a mamzer, right? Why do you guys think that the child is not considered a mamzer? He says very simple, right? Why do you guys think it's not considered a mamzer? So says the Gemara, after all, why exactly is the child for sure not a mamzer? If he was conceived by the deceased brother before his death, then certainly he's the product of a perfectly legitimate union, right? At the end of the day, she was married to the first husband. Now, even if you're going to tell me he was conceived after the remarriage of the Yibum to the brother, then the deceased brother had died without fathering a child. then the widow was permitted to get married to the brother, because that's Ibum, and then there's no problem then. So again, that means a child, no matter what, is not a problem. Now listen to this. Listen carefully. The Yerushalmi looks at this Mishnah, and it says that from here we work off the assumption that a woman cannot conceive from two different men. Because if this were possible, then why don't we suspect that the infant in this case is the product of both brothers? And then again, should be a mamzer or half a mamzer. Okay? Why? If the woman had conceived before the first husband's death, then her remarriage was forbidden. And if the living brother contributed to the formation of the child, then that portion is a mamzer, the result of a forbidden union between a man and his sister-in-law. The Yerushalmi proceeds to note that the Mishnah ruling then appears right to run in opposition with the Isha Benayim of Goliath having fathered by many men. So this view, the Yerushalmi comments, clearly accepts the possibility of a child being the product of multiple fathers, seemingly in contrast to the Mishnah's ruling. Meaning, the Mishnah in Yevamot, to do with Yevamot, is mashma, it implies that a person could only have one father. So it's either that the child was from the first father, or the brother, the second father. And therefore, there's no mamzerut here for sure. But the Gemara and Sotah that we mentioned that had to do with Goliath is mashma that he had tons of fathers. So therefore, what's going on exactly? Because she had relations, the mother of Goliath, 100 with 100 men. So therefore, in the same night, and therefore, he could have 100 fathers. So the Yerushalmi then reconciles the two sources. And listen to the answer, Yerushalmi. Remember, Yerushalmi is the Gemara of Yerushalmi, Talmud Yerushalmi. It says by asserting that once 3 days pass after intercourse and initial conception, the embryo is fully formed and will not be affected by contact with additional sperm. Thus, in the case of Goliath's mother, she had intercourse with 100 men in a single night. So all of them could become the father. Every single one of these men could become a father. That's why he was obviously a big giant, no? But whereas in the Mishnah's case, the widow remarried after 3 days after the husband's death. She didn't wait the 3 months. She had to wait for 3 months to see if she's pregnant or not. She didn't wait 3 months, but it was after 3 days. And therefore, the child cannot be possibly the product of two fathers. So the Yerushalmi clearly acknowledges the possibility of a child being co-fathered by multiple men, understanding the description of Goliath, Isha Benayim in this vein. Rashi, though, says no, that it just meant that he had many fathers, but it was only one real father, because only one of them could have really, hit the target, right, and get the job done. Okay, so now he says these two views may be reflected in the different interpretations given by the commentators to the term Bnei Revuvia. We know that there are certain halachot called Teisha Midot. Teisha Midot means in halachot of relations, there are certain halachot, for example, a person wants to divorce his wife, right? So therefore, he cannot have relations with her because he wants to divorce her. So the fact that he wants to divorce her, he can't take advantage of her body or of her by having relations, because that's called Grushat Alev. Benes Nuah, what is that? He's having relations with his wife, but he's thinking about another woman. So he's dreaming and thinking about, hallucinating about another woman, and he's with his own wife. It's called Benes Nuah, right? That he hates her. Another one is called Bnei Revuvia. What is Bnei Revuvia exactly? So this is a Gemara in Nedarim. So again, remember, there are 9 cases there in the Gemara. Bnei Shichut, if she's drunk, he's not allowed to have relations with her. Why? If she's drunk, that's without consent. So if he cannot have relations, it's his own wife. Sorry, it's not true. She's sleeping. There's many different halachot which come out that it's not that the woman is a utensil, right? She's a human being. So therefore, right, these are the different halachot. So now this is one of the 9 cases called Bnei Revuvia. The Gemara lists several examples of children born from a problematic union between the husband and the wife. And one of them is Bnei Revuvia. Literally means children of a mixture. Okay? The commentary there to Nedarim and Rashi says that a woman had engaged with relations with several different men. And therefore, we don't know who's the father. Right? So therefore, again, the explanation clearly assumes that only one of them is biological father. Rashi, according to his reasoning. Rashi has the same mindset all throughout. only one man could be the father. If one man could be the father, here she had relations with a few different men, but this child, we don't know who he is. So it's Bnei Irvuvia. Fine. But the Ran says on the Gemara, several people had relations with her. So therefore, he's saying it's a product of multiple men. So according to what we just brought down in Rashi and Ran, now it makes sense. It's likely that Rashi understood that according to Talmud Bavli, it argues on the Yerushalmi's explanation of the Mishnah. And therefore, there doesn't exist such a case where you can have multiple fathers, and according to Yerushalmi, it could. However, though, one could actually, explain the Bavli's view differently in light of a controversial theory in the Nod of Yehuda. The Nod of Yehuda says that what happens if the husband dies before the wife conceives? Which means we know that we're coming up to Shavuot, right? And Shavuot, we have Shloshet Yimei Hagbala. What is Shloshet Yimei Hagbala? 3 days before Shavuot, we were told, Al tigishu l'isha, don't touch your wife. Don't get close to your wife. Why? In order that everyone's pure. The men and the women. Now, the thing is like this. If a man had relations with his wife, he goes to the mikveh and he's pure. So what's the problem? The problem is with her. Because if the semen comes out, right? So then what happens is that it impurifies her for that day. Now, the thing is like this. Until when can semen come out and contaminate the woman? So the Gemara says, and this is also Halakha L'Maaseh, and that's why there's such a concept as 4 and 7 or 5 and 7, right? When a woman's a nidah, she needs to wait 4 and 7. Where does the 4 come from, right? So basically what happens is like this. A woman, right, when she has relations with her husband, right, afterwards she's walking around the next day and semen comes out. And now she gets all upset. Why? She thinks, okay, so now she can become pregnant. Why? The semen fell out, but it's not true. Even if she has one drop of semen that stays inside of her, one drop of semen has enough DNA in order to make a child. And that's why the Gemara says in Masechet Nidah that if a person masturbates and he takes out a seed, it's like he brings a mabul to the world. Why? Every single drop of that seed could become a new child. So if you could have, I don't know how many drops, every single one could become a child. So it's like it became that they brought a mabul to the world. Now what happens is as follows, right? The semen in itself could impregnate her. She could conceive within 3 days. After 3 days, the semen becomes rotten and she cannot become pregnant. And that's why we always explain that the mitzvah of the mikveh night is usually always called the Leil Tevilah mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. Why? Usually she becomes pregnant on mikveh night. Why? Very simple. If you have a woman that she has a normal period of every 30 days, okay? Ovulation always occurs 14 days before the period. So 14 days before the 30 days, right? You have day 16, right? So it's 15 and night 16. Ovulation usually occurs between a 12 to 24-hour period. So she has, let's say, a 12-hour period of ovulation. Now what happens is a woman comes and she gets her period. So now it depends how long is the period. Naturally, the period could be whether it's going to be 4, 5, 6, 7, right? There are some women that even have 8 days, and we try to obviously cut that down. But whatever the case is, even if it's going to be 6 days or 5 days, whatever you want, right? 5, 6 days, or she's doing the 4 and 7 and 5 and 7. She goes to the mikveh after 12 days. So on the 13th night, she goes to the mikveh. What happens is they have relations. Now, she didn't ovulate yet. She's only going to ovulate within the next 3 days. But since they had the relations already now, she could become pregnant from that relations of the Leil Tevilah, of the Tevilah night. Why? Because at the end of the day, what's happening is that 3 days, it could still come out that she could become pregnant. That's why what happens is that let's say a woman, magically she only saw for 10 minutes, but she saw her period. Now she has to do 4 and 7. Why in the world does she have to do 4 and 7? So the answer is very simple, because since she had relations with her husband last night, and then she still has the semen inside of her, for the next 3 days, if the semen comes out, it contaminates her. It doesn't let her count the 7 clean days. And therefore, only after 4 days, because it's 3 days, 72 hours, but it has to be the 72-hour period, right? 24-hour, 3 of 24-hour periods. After the 72 hours, so now, if the husband had relations with her last night is Thursday night, so therefore, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night is 3 days. But she can't start counting until the 4th day, because since it's already Sunday night, she has to do a sektarah, she has to clean herself already during the day. So therefore, you have to wait 4 and 7. Ashkenazim do 5 and 7 because they suspected that maybe the husband had relations with his wife during Ben Hashmashot, during twilight, which means in the period between sunset and nightfall. He thought it was daytime and really it's considered nighttime. So he started counting the 3 days earlier and really it's 1 day later. So because of that, Ashkenazim do 5 and 7 and not 4 and 7. There is going to be other differences between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, but that's just a basic halachot. So to do a Shavuot, in order for her to be clean, for the women to be clean for Shavuot, 3 days that we do not come close to our wives. It's because during those 3 days, even if we had relations the night before the 3 days, by the time it comes Shavuot, everybody's pure. Also the men and also the women. Because if they would have had the relations afterwards, the men could have gone to the mikveh 100% the next morning and they were clean. What about the women? She wouldn't have been pure for Shavuot. So because of that, right, 3 days before Shavuot, we have 3 days that we are told, do not come close to your wife, right? And after Shavuot, they were told, go to your wives, and everyone had boys, right? That's what's brought down in the Torah. Go back to your tents, they went with their wives, and they all had boys. So therefore, it says now what happens is as follows. How do we get onto this? According to now what we just mentioned, now listen to this chidush of the Nod of Yehuda. The Nod of Yehuda says, what happens right now if the husband dies before his wife conceives? That means the husband has relations with her and he dies right after the relations. Yeah, it's happened before. Yeah, so what happened is all of a sudden he drops dead. Now she still didn't conceive, right? She's only going to conceive within, let's say, the next 3 days. So what happens is, he says here, she's going to be requires yibum, even if afterwards the sperm which had been in her uterus fertilizes an egg. Why? Since the conception did not occur before his death, so therefore the widow requires yibum, despite the fact that she's carrying his child. If so, then even if we accept the possibility of multiple fathers, the child would still be legitimate regardless of when yibum occurred. Why? Because even if the widow remarried immediately after her husband's death, and the second brother contributed to the formation of the embryo, the marriage is nevertheless valid since the first husband died before conception, and yibum was therefore warranted. This is a chidush, a novelty of the Nod of Yehuda that obviously we don't hold on, right? But the Nod of Yehuda wanted to say that when do we go after yibum? At the time of death. The time of death, there's no child. But 1 second, but she's going to conceive tomorrow morning. Because remember, she can conceive within the next 3 days. Doesn't matter. According to him, right now she's obligated yibum. So she's obligated yibum. So therefore, the second husband could be with her, and there's no problem. That's the brother-in-law, and there's no problem whatsoever. But okay, fine. But now, according to what we just mentioned, now we're going to go into all the halachot now, because basically, as we already just saw, according to the Gemara Sota, Goliath came from multiple fathers, not according to Rashi, but according to the Yerushalmi, and then Tosafot over there. Right? Not only Goliath, a human being. A human being could come from multiple fathers, only if it's on the same night, which means by the time of conception. After the 3-day period, then no. Because once it holds in, and now she conceives, that's it. The embryo's finished. Now you can put whatever you want, nothing's going to change anything. But beforehand, yes. That is the way the Yerushalmi learns. So now he says like this. The Yerushalmi's view, which is followed by Tosafot, now gives rise to the question as the halachic status of each of the two fathers in a case in which a child was conceived from two different men. The question affects several different halachic issues, as, for example, cursing a parent or hitting a parent would apply to both men, right? And whether the child also gets inheritance from both men, right? From both of the states. Right? This question was addressed by the Bet Yitzchak. Here he cites the Gemara's discussion in Chulin. The Gemara says that what happens in a case of a he-goat that impregnated a doe, and a female product of this union then grew up and had a young deer of her own. Is there a prohibition of Otov Beno? Otov Beno means that you're not allowed to sacrifice a mother and a child on the same day. We're talking about animals. That means you're not allowed to bring a sacrifice of a mother and a child on the same day. The Gemara cites two different views in this regard. It explains the debate revolves around, do we suspect for the father or not? Okay, and the Bet Yitzchak notes, all opinions agree that if we must indeed take the father's identity into consideration, then this young doe is considered to be a goat, and therefore there's a prohibition, because Otov Beno is only for domesticated animals, not for wild animals. This would seem to be the proof that even a half-father has the status of a full-fledged father. Therefore, the Bet Yitzchak concludes that in the case of Goliath as well, all the men who contributed to his creation in his mother's womb would be considered as halachic fathers with respect to the prohibitions against striking, cursing, inheritance, and so on. Even though each father only contributed a small amount, after all, according to Yerushalmi's account, there was 100 men, but they're all halachic fathers. The Bet Yitzchak even brings another proof from a Minchat Chinuch. The Minchat Chinuch says, what happens if you have a Jewish man, right? A Jewish man, the father is a child with a shivcha, that she's half a slave and half free. A woman who's a half maid servant and a half free woman. The product, remember, nowadays we don't have slaves, so we don't understand this. But in the olden days, you could have a person that he's half of slave and half free, which means that he redeemed only half of himself. The other half is still a slave. So the product of such a union is also a half servant and a half free woman. The servant portion of this child is the product only of the mother, right, who was a maid servant, and not all the product of the father, who was an ordinary free man. Nevertheless, the Minchat Chinuch says that the child would be forbidden from hitting both of the parents, even his father, despite the fact that only portion of his being is his father's side, child, but still, right, says the Bet Yitzchak, this is the halacha. Another question, Prud Vu. Does the man fulfill his obligation of Prud Vu by being a partial father? If he's not the sole father of a child, but rather one of several fathers, is that enough to be credited with Prud Vu, procreating, or not? The Minchat Chinuch raises a similar question concerning a child of, again, Chetzi Shukha, Chetzi Bat Cholim. As we already mentioned, he went with a woman that she's half free and half a slave. So the Minchat Chinuch says, does one have the mitzvah or not? So he says, the Pri Megadim brings down that according to the Tosafot and Gittin, he does not fulfill the mitzvah of Prud Vu, right? But the Pri Megadim says, I don't understand why. Now, this also would apply in the case of multiple fathers. Why? Because at the end of the day, you don't do it. So at first glance, you could actually draw proof to the contrary. Why? The Yerushalmi says that if a child is born after the widow's remarriage from the fathers, from both fathers, then it would be considered a mamzer, since the widow's remarriage would have been forbidden. If she had conceived from the first brother, then the mitzvah yibum would not have applied, and then she would have been forbidden to the second father. So therefore, it comes out that yibum would have not applied, even though the widow is only carrying a partial child, right, from the first husband. So he says this partial child suffices for us to consider the deceased brother as having fathered a child, and therefore they're not allowed to get married. Which means, one more time, what did we just say before? If right now she did become pregnant from the first husband, and now she could become pregnant from the second husband, the child will be a half a mamzer. But 1 second, why was it a half a mamzer? If you're going to tell me that the first husband had a partial child, right, because the second one also attributed it to it, and that partial child is now going to exempt her from yibum, and now she's doing yibum, that's the problem. So therefore, that's a proof that now even having a half a child is considered a child. So he says, but the difference between this is not the truth. Why? He says because it could be that by yibum, even by having a partial child, it exempts from yibum. But to do with Prud Vu of procreating, you have to have 100% a child in order to be considered procreating, right? And not a half a child. Another incredible case, right, is going to be, 1 second. What about now Kiuna? In a case in which both fathers are Kohanim, so then the son is certainly a Kohen, correct? Imagine both fathers, right? They're both Kohanim. So then obviously the child is a Kohen. And therefore so then now the question is, can he become Tameh for both fathers? Because remember, a Kohen could only become Tameh for 7 family members that pass away. Father, mother, brothers, not married sister, son and daughter, and wife. Okay? What happens now? He's got 2 fathers. So does he become Tameh for both fathers? So Kohanim, of course, may not expose themselves to ritual impurity of human remains, but it is permitted in the case of the father Kohen's family member. In the case of 2 fathers, each father is only a partial father. So the question is he allowed to know? The Bet Yitzchak writes that the son would be permitted to become Tameh upon the death of either father, and each father would be allowed to become Tameh for the death of the son as well. Because as mentioned, he maintains that partial fatherhood is halachically equivalent to ordinary complete fatherhood. We should note, however, that the Minchat Chinuch questions whether a Kohen may become Tameh or not with the Chetzi Shimcha, Chetzi Bat Cholim, right? Because again, it's only a half. A different question arises in a case in which the child is fathered by 2 men and only one of them is a Kohen. So seemingly the child has the status of a half a Kohen. So the Minchat Chinuch addresses a different situation in a half a Kohen and raises the question, what about now a Bechor, right? Or what about now the procedure of bringing a Korban? Because there's a difference if the Kohen himself is doing it, so he brings it and he eats it. But if he's not a Kohen at all, but here he's got a half a Kohen here. because one father is a Kohen, the other father is not a Kohen. Next case also, Chetzi Erva. Another question arises in this such a scenario. If we accept the possibility of multiple fathers, again, one more time, you guys are correct. If we're going to accept that it doesn't exist multiple fathers, so everything that we're mentioning now just falls off the grid, even though medically speaking, they're already getting two mothers. And as we said, later on, they'll continue. Don't worry about it. Medicine advances, you understand? Now, the only thing is, when they're advancing, we already had these things hundreds and thousands of years ago, you understand? Goliath did not just happen now. Goliath was many, many years ago. The Shemuel in the Navi, it already tells you that he's Isha Benai. And the Gemara, which is more than 2,000 years ago, already explained to you that it was multiple men. Now, the only question is, does that mean multiple men, but one of them only scored the bullseye? Or does it mean, no, everybody really participated, and therefore they actually had this child with multiple fathers? Okay, so now he comes and he says like this. He comes and he says, right, as follows. He says another intriguing question is going to be, if we accept the possibility of multiple fathers, is the child then permitted to get married to all the family members or not? Because if you're going to tell me that it's not his real father, so then he would get married to the daughter. But if it's his half father, so he can't get married to the daughter, sister, all the other things as well. So the Minchach Chinuch in several addresses, right, in several places, he comes and he addresses the concept of half incest, right, in which family members are only partially related to one another. And again, he brings down the same case of Chetzi Shivcha, Chetzi Bat Cholim, which means a free man has relations with a person which is a half maidservant and half free, where the child is only partially the father's son, right? And therefore there he says that it's also halachically equivalent to ordinary, it's prohibited. And also Rav Moshe Feinstein says, if we accept the notion of multiple fathers, the child will be forbidden to marry the family members of all the fathers as well. Okay? Next one, yichus, genealogy, lineage. Yeah, so look how many cases we have that if we do take on the concept of multiple fathers, look how many differences you have. Another one is yichus, genealogy, lineage. Now, Moshe also addresses the question of how a situation would be treated with respect to the halachot requiring knowledge of one's pedigree, one's yichus. Yichus is the genealogy. For example, the Gemara Yevamot says of Shemuel, right? It says over there in the name of Shemuel, if a child is known to have been born from several men, and all of them are Kohanim. Meaning, imagine right now, you have one woman in a cave. 5 Kohanim go in the cave, and they have relations with her, right? And they come out. Now, they watch the cave from beginning to end for 9 months. She gives birth. Is the child a Kohen or not? Obviously, the child is a Kohen. It came from one of these 5 Kohanim. What's the halakha status of this or not? So says the Gemara, right? Gemara Yevamot. It is not known which of these Kohanim is the father. He does not receive the privilege of Kiuna. Even though the father is definitely a Kohen. As I told you, there was 5 Kohanim going in the cave. They checked beforehand. She wasn't pregnant. She was nothing. You know, 100%, nobody touched her. It was only these 5 Kohanim. But it was all 5 that had relations with her. Right? She what? The child is a Kohen. But he doesn't get Kiuna. Why? He says, even though his father is definitely a Kohen, he's disqualified from Kiuna because he cannot confirm his yichus. Rav Moshe, that's what raises the question of whether this would apply to a child of father with multiple Kohanim. On the one hand, unlike in the case discussed in the Gemara, the child's yichus is known with certainty. On the other hand, the halakha established in the Gemara that perhaps it requires the Kohen definitely knows that he's a child of a single Kohen and not multiple Kohanim, right? Because again, in the case of the Gemara, we didn't know who's the father. We know for sure he's a Kohen, but we don't know which one. Here in our case, you know who's the father, but they're both the fathers. But it's not 100% a father. So that's why Rav Moshe Feinstein comes and he says, maybe Be'emet, it's not going to be good as a Kohen. Rav Moshe raises a similar question to do with the prohibition of Havchana. What does that mean? As we mentioned before, when you marry a woman within 3 months of divorce or becoming widowed, there's a problem. When a woman becomes widowed or divorced, they have to wait minimum 3 months in order to make sure that she's not pregnant. So says the Gemara, the halakha requires waiting 3 months in order to certain before the remarriage whether the woman has been pregnant at the time of the divorce or the husband's death. One reason given in the Gemara is the requirement is a practical need to determine the child's father, to ensure that he does not marry his father's family members. But the Gemara also says a different reason to know the identity of one's father, which means, why? Because here it says in the footnote number 4, because Shekhinah only goes, the divine providence of God only goes on people that have yichus. That means we know exactly who they come from. So according to this second reason, says Moshe Feinstein, whether a person would be forbidden to cohabit with a woman in a situation in which she would be co-fathering the child, as the child will be unable to identify himself as a child of a particular man, that would be a problem. On the one hand, right, one could argue the requirement of a chana is only just to make sure that they don't get married to family members. But on the other hand, no, maybe it's actually no, who's the real father? Now we're going to go into this about what about now a half a Jew? Okay, 1 second. What about a half a Jew? Half Jew. We're going to now speak about the half Jew. In any event, according to the view of Tosafot and the Yerushalmi, a child can have 2 or more halachic fathers. Now we may reasonably assume that a child can simply have multiple mothers if the egg is comprised from genetic material from several women. Thus, just as the Bet Yitzchak and Moshe Feinstein assert that all the fathers that contribute towards the child creation have the halachic status of a father, so similarly, when the fetus is the product of the contributions of several women, so then they will be regarded also as a child's halachic mothers. Therefore, if the some of the women are not Jewish and others are, so now a situation could arise in which the child would only be partially Jewish. A precedent for such a status is a Minchat Chinuch's discussion, a case involving 2 Jews who co-owned an Eved Kinani, a non-Jewish servant, until one of them freed his portion. So then the servant went under, he did conversion. So now the conversion, though, is not valid until he's 100% released. So therefore, he's half Jewish and half servant, right? So now when the other one frees him completely, then he completely converts. This intriguing status gives rise to a number of difficult questions concerning mitzvah observance. Intuitively, we might simply require this to perform all the mitzvot because he's half Jewish. However, though, the Minchat Chinuch writes, it's not always that simple. For example, on Shabbat, it's prohibited for a non-Jew to refrain from melacha on Shabbat, right? So therefore, how does he do? If he's half Jewish, from the goy aspect of himself, he's not allowed to keep Shabbat. But from the Jewish aspect of himself, he has to keep Shabbat. So what's he going to do then? So therefore, the Minchat Chinuch also raises the question to do with Korban Pesach. The Jewish part of the Korban Pesach, yes, to be in Korban Pesach, but the goy part, he's not allowed to be in Korban Pesach. So what's he supposed to do? So because of that, there's a big question now. That's why I told you before, I think it was Goldie that asked me to do with what happens if the surrogates or somebody's not Jewish, you have big problems. So now here, we're just going to give the answer, and with this we finish the shiur to do a Shabbat observance. To do the Shabbat observance, there was spoken about in many of the Charonim. How do they do that? That, for example, a convert. Let's say you have a ger that converts, and he does the Brit Milah, but he doesn't finish the conversion until he goes to the mikveh, and it's already Shabbat. So now what do you do now? Because again, he started the conversion, he did the Brit Milah for the conversion, but he didn't do Tevilah, he didn't go to the mikveh yet for the conversion. So what do you do then to do a Shabbat? So they say Rabbi Yisrael Salanter actually recommended that the convert has to tell a goy to do melacha on his behalf. Because if he's considered Jewish, so then which means that one is held liable for the sins that he commits, right, at somebody else's behest. So the act of Shabbat desecration is then given to the goy and not to the convert. But if the convert at this stage is still a goy, so then he's the one that considered that he was mechalel Shabbat, because then shliach l'dvar avera does not apply to goyim, and therefore it's attributed to him. So by doing it in this way, that the convert tells a goy to be a shaliach, to turn on the light, you get out of all problems. Because if he's Jewish, so it was the goy that did it and not him, and he's still keeping Shabbat, even though he didn't have the goy, but it's not the doraita. But now if he's not Jewish, so then it's attributed to him, and then he was mechalel Shabbat. So therefore he's okay. So on both sides, he's going to be safe. Another solution, which is brought down by the Khatam Sofer, is that you could wear tzitzit going in a public domain. Because if he's Jewish, so then the tzitzit are considered part of his attire, and he's not carrying on Shabbat. But if he's the goy, that he's not commanded on tzitzit, so then he's carrying on Shabbat if he wears it, and that's also brought down the name of Chaim Brisk, and therefore that's going to be okay as well. A similar solution was also reported by the Yoel, that he says that the convert could walk through the public domain wearing tefillin, because that would be considered a garment only if he's Jewish, not if he's not Jewish. So if he puts on tefillin and he walks in a public domain, if he's considered Jewish, right? So therefore, what happens is that it's considered a garment. If he's not Jewish, then he's carrying on Shabbat, and then he's allowed to do that. So therefore, he's mechalel Shabbat. So by doing that, these are just 3 different scenarios of how to answer up by a half Jew. How would he get out of the problem of keeping Shabbat or not keeping Shabbat? So obviously, again, as we already mentioned, to do with the multiple fathers, this would have an effect as well. So one more time, to do with this case in England, right, which actually there was an incredible case that they're now having multiple mothers in halakha does it exist or doesn't it exist? First of all, we brought down the Gemara in Sotah to do with Goliath. We brought down the machloket between Rashi and the Tosafot over there, that according to Rashi, it doesn't exist having more than one father or more than one mother, but according to Tosafot and Yerushalmi, it does. The way to answer up the Gemara to do with the Ibum was that the child for sure is not a mamzer, because they answered up that within the first 3 days, so then if a woman has relations, it could still affect the child. After 3 days of being pregnant, then it cannot affect the child. So therefore, that's the answer of the Yerushalmi. Now, according to this, we understand also what's the explanation with Goliath. Goliath had multiple fathers because it was all the same night, so he could have multiple fathers. Now we understand also the machloket, what is b'nei Vuvia, multiple husbands or multiple relations. A woman that has relations with a few men, the child is called b'nei Vuvia. Why? You don't know who's the father of the child. So now, according to Rashi, it's one of them is the father, but you just don't know which one. According to the Tosafot and the Yerushalmi, no, it's that each person could be the father as well, because each one could contribute towards it. Then we came and we said, okay, fine. So now if you're going to tell me now that it's a half father, what about halachot pertaining to hitting a father, cursing a father, inheriting a father? What happens? So we did bring down the Bet Yitzchak that it does apply to everybody, that basically that they're not allowed to hit both fathers, they're not allowed to curse both fathers, they will get inheritance from both fathers. What about procreating, prurvu? So we said that to do with prurvu, there's a difference between ibum and prurvu. Ibum, even by partially having a child, it's enough to exempt from ibum. But for procreating, for pruvu, you have to have 100% a child. I don't want to get into all the details there. Kehuna also. What happens if both of them are Kohanim? So obviously he's going to be a Kohen. What happens if one of them is a Kohen? So then that's a question. But even with all these things of Kohanim or not Kohanim, you're going to have a problem also to do with that they wouldn't have the status quo of a Kohen because you don't know who the father is because of genealogy. The same halacha applies to half incest, which means that he's not allowed to get married to any part of both fathers' families or both mothers. And the genealogy, we just mentioned now, Rav Moshe Feinstein, that they cannot come and have any parts of kihuna as well. And then the half Jew is what we just mentioned now. What happens if one of those fathers or mothers are not Jewish? And obviously then you would have a very big problem of partial Jewish or not Jewish. Obviously that would be a big problem. You have Shabbat observance, you have other things as well. And we had 3 ways of getting out of Shabbat observance with a person that has the status quo of a half a Jew. How does we do it in order not to get any problems? But again, this is actually a very interesting topic because this could actually happen, again, according to the Yerushalmi, that people could actually have multiple fathers or multiple mothers.